Why is Russia so relentlessly focused on Ukraine? I mean, really, what is driving this? To understand what's happening today, you really have to look past the headlines and dig deeper, into geography and into history. So let's dive into this geopolitical puzzle together.
Right off the bat, you run into this paradox that's at the very heart of Russia's identity. You'd think, with all that space, they'd feel incredibly secure. But to really get their actions, you have to understand that for Russia, geography isn't about size. It's about feeling trapped, landlocked, and vulnerable.
And that brings us to our first big concept here. Russia's behavior isn't just random or erratic. It's driven by a dilemma that's centuries old, and it comes from being a very specific type of nation, a land power.
Now, this idea of a land power comes from a British geographer named Halford Mackinder. He basically argued that the world is split between two kinds of powers, those that control the seas, like the British Empire at the time, and those that control the land. And Russia? Well, it is the ultimate land power.
Mackinder called Russia's core the heartland. Because it's so deep inside the Eurasian continent, no navy on Earth could ever hope to reach it, let alone conquer it. This makes Russia incredibly tough to defeat, for sure. But here's the flip side. It also makes it feel permanently surrounded and cut off from the rest of the world.
This quote just nails the most basic, almost primal driver of Russian foreign policy. I mean, a huge part of the country is just too cold, too frozen for much of the year. So for centuries, the strategic impulse has always been to push south toward warmer climates and, most importantly, toward warm water ports.
Let's just look at the map for a second, because Russia's access to the sea is, frankly, a geopolitical nightmare. The Caspian Sea? It's basically a giant saltwater lake. It goes nowhere. The Black Sea is better, but it has one massive problem. There's only one way out, the Bosphorus Strait. And that strait is controlled entirely by Turkey, which just happens to be a NATO member. That is what you call a strategic choke point. So you can see where this is going. The key thing to understand is this. If you want to project power from the Black Sea, you absolutely have to control the naval bases on the Crimean Peninsula. We're talking especially about the deep-water port of Sevastopol. And since Crimea is part of Ukraine, well, controlling Ukraine, or at the very least preventing it from becoming an enemy, becomes a non-negotiable security issue for Russia.
So it really all boils down to two critical imperatives. First, the strategic need for that warm water port in Crimea. Without it, Russia's Black Sea fleet is pretty much bottled up. And second, the economic need. You see, Russia has a lot of resources, but it struggles with food. And Ukraine? Ukraine is one of the world's great breadbaskets. So for Russia, Ukraine is both a strategic gateway to the world and a vital pantry right next door.
But this isn't just about ports and grain. Not at all. There's a deep, emotional, and historical connection here, which raises the question, if they share such deep roots, why on earth do they see the world and each other so differently?
The source material we're drawing from offers this really powerful analogy. Think of Russia and Ukraine as two brothers. They're born from the same family, but they're separated as kids and raised by completely different families with different values. When they finally meet again as adults, they might share some history, but they're essentially strangers. They just don't understand each other anymore.
And this timeline shows you exactly how that split happened. Their story starts together in the Kievan Rus. But in the 13th century, bam, the Mongol invasion shatters their world, and that's the crucial split. For the next couple hundred years, Russia is absorbing a political culture of centralized, autocratic power from the Mongols. At the exact same time, Ukraine is falling under the influence of Poland and Lithuania, getting exposed to European ideas about democracy and decentralization. You can see these two completely different paths forming, one looking east to a strongman model, the other looking west towards parliaments. It's the perfect historical setup for the political clash we see today.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute, because this deeply personal conflict between two brothers is also playing out on a much bigger global stage. It's really just a continuation of a power struggle that's been going on for centuries.
Back in the 19th century, this rivalry was called the Great Game. It pitted the world's dominant sea power, the British Empire, against the dominant land power, the Russian Empire. Britain's whole goal was to contain Russia and keep it away from the world's key sea lanes. Now fast forward. After World War II, Britain's power fades, and who steps into that role? The United States, with NATO as its main tool. The players have changed, but the game is pretty much the same. So, from this classic geopolitical point of view, the strategy of the sea powers becomes very clear. If you want to weaken and contain the great land power Russia, what's the most effective way to do it? You peel away the one piece of land it considers absolutely essential to its security and its identity. Ukraine. Bringing Ukraine into the Western sphere of influence, well, that would be the ultimate checkmate.
And these huge external pressures from east and west, they don't just surround Ukraine, they cut right through the heart of the country itself, creating these deep, painful divisions that are still there today. Ukraine is in many ways literally split in two. And that historical divergence we just talked about, you can actually see it on a modern map. The Dnieper River acts as a kind of rough cultural and political dividing line. To the west of the river, you have a legacy of European influence, and people tend to look toward Europe, NATO, and the EU. But to the east, the historical, linguistic, and cultural ties to Russia are incredibly strong. This internal division, which is centuries in the making, makes the country a permanent battleground for influence.
So when a pro-Western government took power in Ukraine, Russia put a clear four-step playbook into action. First, they recognized that trying to control the whole country was probably impossible. Second, they prioritized their single most important asset, that naval base in Crimea. Third, they justified their move by using the pro-Russian majority in Crimea to hold a referendum. And finally, step 4, they formally annexed the territory, securing their warm water port once and for all.
And this brings us to the ultimate tragedy of Ukraine. It is a textbook geopolitical fault line. It's a place on the map where two massive tectonic plates of power, the Euro-Atlantic sea power and the Eurasian land power, are grinding against each other. And just by virtue of its location, it's become a permanent zone of conflict. All of this leaves us with a final, very difficult question. The name Ukraine historically means borderland. So if a nation's very identity is to be the frontier between two competing civilizations, is a lasting peace ever truly possible?